So today we're going to talk about the Western Conference and specifically talk about how tight the playoff race right now as we head into the second half of the season. Now, a couple of weeks ago, I talked about how wide open the Eastern Conference is, and in some way, the Western Conference is kind of the same thing. Although in the West, there's feels like there's kind of like free tier right now in the West, where the top tier of the West are the top two team in the Western Conference. That is Austin FC and LAFC, and it seems like those two teams are not only battling for the top spot of the Western Conference, but potentially battling for the supporters shield for this season. And then you get to the second tier, which is the tier that I'm going to talk about in this video, is the playoff tier, because right now the fight for these playoff position is very tight, and that when you look at the standings, and even though I didn't put RSL in here, but even going to RSL, it goes when you look at where they are and go all the way down to 12th place where the Colorado Rapids is. It's only separated by 9 points. And then you look at the third tier in the Western Conference. That's pretty much the tier where it's like, yeah, we're pretty much done this season. And those teams are the San Jose Earthquakes and Sporting KC. And even though they're also pretty close in terms of the playoff line, I think those teams are done consider of the season that they've been in and the form that they also have been in recently. So, yeah, like I said, today I am going to look at all these teams that is going to be fighting for playoff position. And as I said, I left RSL out mainly because I want to specifically look at the fourth position of a position that is very important in the playoffs in MLS, because that is the last position where you can at least host one home game in the playoffs. And so far, that team that owns that position is Minnesota United, who currently have played 21 games with a 9-4-8 record, 31 points so far, and have scored 29 goals while allowing 25 goals with a goal differential of +4. Now, I'm also going to look at the next 5 games for each of these teams, because these next 5 games could tell the story of where they could be in the standings. And for the Loons, they got Houston on the road this weekend, followed by the Portland Timbers at home. Then they got Colorado on the road, followed by Nashville SC on the road, and Austin FC at home. And, you know, a couple of weeks ago, I mentioned how it feels like the Loons phantom of this team was at an all-time low, and probably even lower than where they were when they came into the league, of how that team was considered a bottom feeder in the first 2 seasons of their existence in MLS. But the reason why the fandom was at an all-time low was because this team was massively underachieving. Like, this team was all the way down to 11th place. The Heath Out Brigade was definitely in full force in a way where it pretty much has now infected the whole fan base. And now it seemed like after that 2-year contract extension that Adrian Heath received, basically the fair weather fans have jumped off the ship. Like, they have canceled their season ticket and basically said they don't want any part of this, and especially an ownership that is being complacent of just being mediocre. Well, ever since that happened, this team has been undefeated. They've gone 4-1-0 ever since the 2-year extension that Adrian Heath has received. And yeah, that just shows you how things can change in a blink of an eye. Now, a lot of the success I think the Loons has had in these last couple of games is mainly because Reynoso has been on fire. And how many times we've said before, when Reynoso is on fire, this team is good. When Reynoso is not on fire and he looked frustrated, this team does not do good, which is kind of a worrying sign, because again, you know, you don't want to have one specific player that can rely, that you superly rely and could really determine the form they are. But I guess that's how the Loons basically built up. And yeah, we'll see whether or not if Reynoso form can continue, because I have a feeling if he can continue, and that he's not only making himself better, but also making players around him that is better. I mean, guys like Luis Almeria, who was basically invincible for the first half of the season, now he's started to get himself back on form. Yeah, this team could once again rise up even higher in the table, as high as even 3rd place, with them just 2 points behind RSL. Now, we look at the 5th place team, that is Nashville SC, and also talk about the next 5 games for the Loons. It's not going to be easy. I mean, the next game against Houston is not going to be easy, because they don't do well against the Dynamo on the road, and not to mention the Dynamo just got a big road win against the Quakes. Almost said they had a big home win when it was actually a road game. Then they got the Timbers at home, which should be a win since they have a good record against the Timbers, if we don't look at what happened in the playoffs last season. Then at Colorado, a place that is also a house of horror for the Loons, where they haven't won a lot of games there. Then they go on the road against Nashville SC, which that could be they could get some points out of that, because Nashville hasn't really done well this season at home. and then they play against Austin FC at home, which is not going to be an easy task because I've talked about Austin being one of the best team in the league and also one of the best team in terms of on the road, and not to mention they've already beaten Minnesota United Allianz Field back in their expansion season. Now, moving to the next team, we got Nashville SC, who currently have an 8-6-7 record after playing 21 games. They have 30 points while scoring exactly the same amount of goals and allowed this season with 27 goals scored, 27 allowed, and unsurprisingly, their goal differential is at 0. Their next 5 games is at FC Cincinnati versus Vancouver, at Portland Timbers versus Toronto FC, and versus Minnesota. So the good news for Nashville is that they do have some road games coming up, because it feels like this is the team, one of the few MLS team where they're more happier to be on the road, and that kind of just sums up what is some of the biggest struggle that Nashville is facing this season, where the reason why they haven't been playing good at home is because the style that they play and the style that Gareth Smith implemented on this team fits better on the road. I mean, you're not going to just bunker and basically look for counterattack at home like what they have done, and in some way it kind of reminds me a lot of the Portland Timbers back in 2019, where remember how the Timbers were in a good run heading into that long home stretch, and then they end up just not really winning those home games and dropping those home resort. And while they did make it to the playoffs that season, they barely did it, and did it on the final day. And I feel like maybe this could be the same case for Nashville SC, though. I expect that when you look at the team that they had, you would assume that they'll eventually figure it out. I mean, when you have Hani Mukhtar as one on your team, you have a shot in terms of making the playoffs. But whether is that going to be enough in terms of getting themselves near the top 4 spot, and especially if they can figure out their home form at Geodis Park, which again I don't know if they can because of the way that they play, and unless if Gareth Smith decided to change it up a little. But yeah, this is a team that could be potentially finishing in around this spot, and that they will continue to do well on the road, but it's always going to be frustrated for these Nashville fans of how they play at home, and they keep dropping points, and also just came off a loss this weekend against LAFC. But like I said, the next game against FC Cincinnati, that could be a win, because Cincinnati is another team that struggle at home. Vancouver could be a win too. Vancouver is a team that, though I will say that the Whitecaps maybe is a little bit underrated, and that when teams play against the Whitecaps, maybe they shouldn't be underestimated, because the Whitecaps could be good not only at home but also could be on the road. Against the Timbers on the road, that should be an interesting matchup with two teams playing the same similar style. Toronto FC at home, that should be a win, though Toronto has added some good attacking pieces. I mentioned before in the last emotion index, I don't know how they're going to get themselves back in the playoff race when their defense still suck. And then of course playing at home against Minnesota shouldn't be easy too, because again, anytime when it's a home game and the Loons have started to figure out their role form a little bit, shouldn't be easy in that one too. But moving on, in the next team, we got FC Dallas, who currently have played 21 games, and they have a 7-8-6 record. They have 29 points while scoring 31 goals and allowing 25 goals, and they have a goal differential of +6. Now, the next 5 games, they got RSL on the road, which that shouldn't be easy, because RSL seems like they're starting to get themselves back in the upward sprint. Then they got a big playoff 6-pointer against the Galaxy. Then they go on the road against Seattle, going on the road against the Portland Timbers, and playing at home against the San Jose Earthquakes. And it's safe to say that out of all these teams that when I look at the next 5 games, Dallas might have one of the toughest one. Like, playing against the 2 Cascadia team on the road, and even their home games is not going to be easy too, because again, the Galaxy, I think, is going to be the only home games where realistically they can get a win, but we talk about they have really struggled at home in these last couple of games, and then also playing against the Quakes, the teams that they have never done well in these past couple of years. So it could be a rough ride for FC Dallas, and it's already been a rough ride because of what I mentioned before, where it feels like it's 2017 all over again, where they get off to a good start and then they start to collapse in the middle of the season. And yeah, right now they are definitely collapsing. And don't let the amount of goal differential, which is the highest out of any team, and the amount of goals that they've scored, which is also well, actually not one of the highest, but the second highest, fool you the fact that this team is having some issue in terms of goal scoring. Like, the goal well has really run dry for this team, and also their defense has started to bend a little bit. And I think the only reason why their defenses still look decent is because Martin Pass is basically bailing them out a lot in these last couple of games. Then we get to the LA Galaxy, who have played 20 games so far with an 8-3-9 record, and somehow the Galaxy, despite all the problems that they've been having in these last couple of games and only have won one out of their last 7, they're still above the red line with 27 points, and they do have a game in hand overall of these teams. But the amount of goals that they scored, 28 goals while allowing 27 with a +1 goal differential. And when you look at the next 5 games, it's not going to be easy either. They get Atlanta United at home. Well, actually, I wouldn't say it's not easy. It's actually a little bit easier than what FC Dallas have to face. They get to play against Atlanta United, which that could be a win, consider Atlanta has been inconsistent this week. And then they got that playoff 6-pointer against FC Dallas on the road. Then they go on the road against Sporting KC, and then they play at home against Vancouver, and then playing at home against the Seattle Sounders. But as if you ask any Galaxy fans about their next 5 games, they will tell you that it doesn't matter if they play an easy schedule. This team is having a lot of issue right now in terms of both goal scoring and defending, and that there's a reason why they have now slid all the way down to 7th position and are barely hanging on to the playoffs. This team just tends to not only struggle at home but also at times on the road too, and that again it feels like it's a matter of time before this team does drop out of the playoffs, because them alongside with FC Dallas are probably the team that is in the worst form right now in the Western Conference with Dallas. If I have mentioned it before, they're on a 7-game winless run heading into this weekend. Now, let's take a look at teams that is just below the red line, which is the Portland Timbers, who had a big opportunity to get above the red line if they would have got a win against the Vancouver Whitecaps, which they weren't able to do. And they have a 6-9-6 record. And another thing that I also want to mention that is very important is the amount of wins that these team has. And right now, that doesn't seem like it's favored the Timbers, because they have the fewest wins. Well, they're tied with the fewest wins along with the Rapids in terms of the record. And it's very important to highlight wins, because that's the first tiebreaker in MLS. They've drawn 9 games this season, which is a lot of draws, and sometimes I talk about how draws, it can go different ways. If you get draws on the road, it's a good thing, but if you get too many of those, especially at home, what we've seen the Timbers have been dropping in points at home, it could come back to bite you, especially when we get into the crunch time, and especially getting to those tiebreaker where the Timbers are not going to have a favorable tiebreaker because they've only won 6 games this season. Now they have 27 points tied with the Galaxy, and the amount of goals that they score is 33, which is by far the most. But they've also allowed 30 goals, which is also one of the worst so far this season, and they have a goal differential of +3. Now the very next game, the good news is they do play against the San Jose Earthquakes at home, which that should be an automatic win for the Timbers, because we know the Quakes sucks on the road against the Timbers, and that place is basically a house of horde, and a place that is an automatic out for the Quakes. But then they have to go on the road against Minnesota, which that's not going to be easy. Then they play at home against Nashville SC, play against FC Dallas, and another game that could be a playoff 6-pointer, and then they go on the road against Toronto FC. So there's definitely some winnable games ahead of them, and again, hopefully that game against the Whitecaps was just a little blip in terms of the second half resurgence that they've gone through, because I think if you look at all these teams besides their other Cascadia rival, the Seattle Sounders, who could most likely get themselves above the red line, that the Timbers is going to be that team to do so. And speaking of Seattle, they're actually right below them with an 8-2-10 record, though they have played fewer games than the Timbers, just 1 fewer games with 26 points. But it's keep in mind that as much as I've talked about the Sounders before, a team that have games in hand, they actually don't have that much game in hand anymore. They only have like 1 more game in hand over a lot of these teams that is above them. And how many times I've said before, just because you have a game in hand doesn't mean that there is a guarantee that you can get above the red line and leapfrog some of these teams that you have game in hand, because you have to win those games in hand if you want to pick up points. If you lose those games in hand, yeah, it's not going to help your causes in terms of getting up the standings. But so far they have 26 points. They have scored 26 goals while allowing 24 of them, and their goal differential is +2. They play Colorado at home this weekend. Then they have to go on the road to play against LAFC, which that's going to be a marquee matchup anytime when Seattle and LAFC get against each other. Then they got Dallas at home, and then on the road they have to play against Atlanta United, and then they play at home against RSL. So again, it's a favorable record with a couple of tricky games, but the issue that the Sounders are having right now is clearly goal scoring, and that they are desperate in terms of trying to get Raul Ruidiaz back, which I think he's going to be back to full fitness soon. And I think once he is back, and once the Sounders start to rediscover their good form, this team shouldn't make the playoffs. Like I'm just feel like it's too good to be true to see the Sounders miss the playoffs, and that I would think that after seeing years and years where the Sounders have been finding in this situation before where they're low in the standings, but that they're going to make that second half resurgence anytime soon, and they kind of show that the last couple of weeks, although it's kind of have come to a grinding halt a little bit. I feel like it's going to continue, and especially as I've already mentioned about the Cascadia Derby, the next one, and especially if that's the one where the Sounders can beat the Timbers on the road, then yeah, you would expect this team is going to go with that second half resurgence and should be above the red line. And that, like I said, with the Timbers, they're one of the teams that below the red line that is most likely going to make the playoffs, and I'll be shocked if they don't do so at the end of the season. Now, we move on, and to complete a hat trick of Cascadia team, we got the Vancouver Whitecaps. So it's kind of interesting. The Cascadia region so far have had teams that is not really doing well this year, and all three Cascadia team that is below the red line. I mean, that's something you usually don't see every day. But like I said, I think we're going to at least get one Cascadia team in the playoffs, because after all, I'm pretty sure these Cascadia team wants to continue the streak of at least having one of the Cascadia team represent the Western Conference in MLS Cup, as we have seen in the past 7 seasons. But for the Whitecaps, they have a 7-5-9 record, and they also have the same amount of points as the Sounders had, but fewer wins, and also one more games than the Sounders have played. They only scored 23 goals, which is by far the fewest out of all these teams I mentioned here, but they also gave up 34 goals, which is also the most out of any team that I'll talk about here. Though, again, I think that number is a little bit inflated, because that number really was shown in the beginning of the season, where this team was an absolute nightmare in terms of trying to keep the ball out of the net, and that that poor form that they started the season kind of inflated that number a little bit, as they have played much better throughout these last couple of months. But it also doesn't help their goal differential is also the worst, with -11 as their goal differential, also one of the worst in the Western Conference. Now, they do play at home against Chicago before going on the road against Nashville SC, and then they play at home against the Houston Dynamo before going on the road against the Galaxy, and then they get to play at home against the Colorado Rapids. And I think out of all these teams that has the easiest schedule in their next 5 games, the Whitecaps probably have that. Like, those are winnable games, especially against the Fire, where, yes, the Fire has definitely played much better, but that's not the case when they're on the road. At Nashville, should be a game where they could get a result, because Nashville doesn't do well at home. Houston at home, the Dynamo, despite they did get that win against the Quakes, they do still suck up on the road. And then at the Galaxy, a team that the Whitecaps had good history against the Galaxy before, and especially the Galaxy seems to give 3 points to every single team whenever they play at home. And then against the Rapids at home, and we also know how good their home form has been this season, only losing 2 games at home so far at BC Play. So yeah, you would fancy that the Whitecaps could definitely make a run in these next 5 games, and that, like I said, out of any team that has the easiest schedule, they probably have that. Now, moving on, we got the Houston Dynamo, who has a 7-4-10 record, and they have 25 points, and also played 21 games. They've scored 27 goals while allowing 29 with a goal differential of -2. Now, the next 5 games, they got Minnesota at home, followed by the Philadelphia Union on the road. Then they got the Vancouver Whitecaps on the road. Then they got Montreal at home before going on the road against the Colorado Rapids. And these kind of fixtures are also tricky too, because, while the Minnesota Resort are probably the one that is most likely they can get all 3 points, going on the road against the top team in the East is not going to be easy, and it probably will be an impossible task to get points. And then go on the road against the Whitecaps, the teams that has been doing very well at home. That's not going to be easy a task too. Montreal might be one that they could get a win, because Montreal, depending on how their form is, they could that could be a game that they could get a win, though. Again, I expect Montreal could be better because they had their playmaker George Mihailovic back, and then on the road against the Rapids is not going to be easy too because they don't have a good history of going on the road again, going on the road and get a win against the Rapids. So again, in general, going on the road for them hasn't been an easy task for them in the past couple of years. And again, it's interesting. Like the Dynamo is kind of in an interesting stage where they still feel like they're heading the right direction in terms of rebuild, and that what Pablo Nagamura has done to this team has still been better than what we've seen in the past couple of seasons. But is it enough to make it to the playoffs? I'm not quite sure, especially when you have teams above them that are probably going to be geared up much better in terms of making the playoffs, and especially also with the schedule wise, some of these teams are probably have an easier schedule than what the Houston Dynamo has. And then we finally finish with the Colorado Rapids, who, you know, they're only 3 points out of the playoffs with a 6-6-8 record and play 20 games. And again, that's very important because they play one more game than all the teams above them except for the Sounders and the Galaxy. So if they can win that game in hand, it can make it even more interesting to see how congested the playoff position is in the West. They scored 24 goals while allowing 27 with a goal differential of -3. But when you look at the next 5 games, yeah, it's one of the toughest schedule. Like they have Seattle on the road, the Red Bulls on the road, Minnesota at home, Columbus at home, and Vancouver on the road. And out of all those games that most likely could be a win, maybe it's Minnesota, because I can't see how they can potentially get a road win against Seattle, even though the Sounders have struggled before. I think the Sounders could eventually find their groove, and it might start this weekend. And then go on the road against the Red Bulls. And even though the Red Bulls haven't been that good so far this season at home, they have kind of find that shot a little bit in the last couple of games. If you just ignore the New York Derby loss they had, I mentioned Minnesota should be a game that they could get a win because they always tends to get a win against the Loons at home. Then play at home against Columbus. That could be a win too, but Columbus, you know, they have that guy called Cucho Hernandez, and it feels like they're on a great run of form lately. And then go on the road against the Whitecaps. We know how much they struggle on the road. In fact, they're one of the 2 teams that have not won a road game this season. So it's almost like whenever they're on the road, it's either an automatic L or they're probably not going to get a win or only get a draw out of that one. So yeah, again, for the Rapids, if they want to maybe make a late run for the playoffs, and that if they want to keep staying in this, as they're kind of in the tail end of this playoff race as we head into the second half of the season, they need to find a way to win road game, because I don't see how a team don't win a single road game can make it to the playoffs, especially of how the playoff position this season. You know, there's lesser team that get well, not lesser team, but the same amount of team, but there's more teams that is fighting for those playoffs, and only half amount of team that gets to the playoffs, whereas in previous year, more than half of them, of course, gets into the playoffs. But either way, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys see your like, smash the subscribe button. Let me know in the comments below what do you think of this video, and let me know in the comments below, out of all of these teams, who most likely is going to make it to the playoffs, and you know, all these teams that's above the red line, who's most likely the one that's going to fall out, and also most likely out of the teams that is below the red line, who's going to be the ones that could be above the red lines at the end of this season. But yeah, hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you do, make sure you guys like, smash the subscribe button, and yeah, I of course will see you guys next time.